The opposite of dehydration is, so not rehydration, that's the process of getting water, but hyperhydration. Now we're talking about overhydrating. Now you have too much water. And what does that do to the concentration of solutes? Notice that this is our baseline here. As you add more water, now you have the ions and solutes more distributed and they're more spaced apart. Now your solute concentration goes down. Your bodily fluids now become more dilute. So hyperhydration, aka water poisoning or overwatering, or there's many water intoxication. So now you have too much water in your body. So many names for it. What happens to your cells during hyperhydration? Well, again, now we have too much water, right? So your extracellular fluid has too much water. Now the ion concentration is more dilute. So now you have more dilute ion concentrations in your extracellular fluid. Now, remember, our cells have semi-permeable membranes and they're permeable to water. And assuming that no other ions are moving, which way will the water go? Again, in osmosis, things move from low concentration to high concentration. So what's happening is going down, the water is going to go into the cell and hopefully balance out. So things that, again, equilibrium is trying to balance out the solute concentrations on both sides of the membrane, right? So it's going to try to add water so this becomes just as concentrated, or actually just as dilute as the surrounding. So the cell will absorb water, but if it absorbs too much water like red blood cells, they can eventually burst like this poor cell here. So again, this is one reason why hyperhydration can be potentially fatal. This is why you don't inject pure distilled water into a patient. Why? Because you don't want to cause their red blood cells to undergo hemolysis or any of the surrounding endothelial cells or other cells. Now let's talk about hyponatremia. Again, hypo is the opposite of hyper, right? So I mean, hyper meaning above, and over, and excess. Now hypo means below and a lack of, right? What's this natremia? What's that? Well, hypo means below or under, but natrium, so that's the Latin term for sodium. That's why the chemical element or chemical symbol for sodium is Na. It comes from the Latin natrium. So hyponatremia means your blood sodium concentrations are too low. Now, why is this a problem? Well, yeah, and point of clarification, not the same as water intoxication. Again, water intoxication is referring to having too much water in your body, that overhydration, hyperhydration. So it's not the same thing, but if you have water intoxication, you most likely have hyponatremia. But in case it is possible to have like hyponatremia if you with normal fluid balance, if somehow your body is getting rid of excess sodium ions for some reason or not reabsorbing enough. So again, it's closely linked but not one and the same. And what are the symptoms of hyponatremia? Now we know it's low sodium. What does that do to your body? So again, low blood sodium concentration, so things like nausea, vomiting, headache, confusion, muscle weakness, seizures, coma, and death. Well, again, coma, remember, like if a lack of brain function or seizures, also involving the brain. Muscle weakness, what does that involve? Well, muscle tissue, but what controls skeletal muscle? How about headaches? What organ does that affect? And nausea and vomiting, or what the feeling of nausea? What organ is causing that sensation of nausea? Well, again, what's processing that sense of nausea and telling you, hey, I'm kind of nauseous? What's the common link? What type of cell is this? It's a neuron, right? And what organ is mostly made up of these ganglia? Right, your brain. So again, your cells are made your brain is made mostly of neurons. Now, how does this relate to hyponatremia? Why are we getting back into neurology and neuroscience? Well, what am I showing here? What signal is going from the axon hillock and traveling across the axon to the telodendria and the synaptic terminals? Yeah, so action potentials, right? So everyone's favorite topic. Now, okay, this won't be, or I won't test you on this as that deep as I do in the first semester, but to refresh, what happens during action potential? Again, it has to reach some sort of threshold membrane potential, and then this same action potential shape happens every time. And what causes the action potential? is due to ion movement. That's what causes changes in the charge of the cell, and that's why you have this change in membrane potential. Now, what's the first part of an action potential in neurons? So again, remember you have to go all the way to, or you have to push a neuron to its threshold, but what's the first step? Well, we did see that it's a rapid increase in membrane potential, meaning something caused it to get more and more positive inside the cell, right? And voltage gated sodium channels. So these open once you reach this membrane potential here. So once these open, which way does the sodium go? Again, in terms of concentrations, in terms of pressure, things move from high to low concentrations. So what happens? The sodium is more concentrated on the outside in the extracellular fluid, less so on the inside. The sodium will now flow into the cell. And what does this cause? Again, sodium ions are positively charged. It's going to cause the membrane potential to spike upwards. Now we have less sodium. What happens if you push it to threshold? Well, now we have a patient with hyponatremia. So we open these channels and the sodium ion enters in, but you don't get that huge rush anymore. You don't get all these sodium ions rushing in to stimulate the rest of the channels opening. So you're not really going to get an action potential. So this is why hyponatremia causes all those symptoms. If you don't have enough sodium concentration in your extracellular fluid, you can't start that first part of action potential in any of your neurons. So again, this is why it's very important this is why I emphasize the order of these, because again, these electrolyte, these ion concentrations, if you don't have them in balance, then you won't be able to do neural function.